Has llegado a misterios de la oscuridad. En este espacio prohibido, la noche oculta verdades demasiado aterradoras para ser reveladas a la luz del día. Aquí, los misterios que emergen del abismo oscuro desvelan secretos que harán temblar tu cordura. Las historias que estás por descubrir desafiarán todo lo que creías conocer, envolviéndote en un torbellino de miedos y enigmas. Ten cuidado al avanzar, pues algunas puertas, una vez abiertas, nunca podrán cerrarse, y sus revelaciones podrían costarte más de lo que imaginas. The great sentinel clock in the entrance hall tolled the midnight hour, each sonorous vibration shuddering through the bones of the dormant house. I surfaced abruptly from sleep's murky depths, heart hammering against my ribs, grasping at the dissolving phantoms of a nightmare already lost to memory. For a disoriented beat, the room swam, unfamiliar. Then recognition surged, the Ashworth's labyrinthine Victorian manse, this house-sitting assignment, a seemingly effortless path to bolstering meager funds. 3 days I'd inhabited its shadowed corners, yet an unshakable dissonance clung to the air, a feeling that the very plaster and lathe held their breath. Perhaps it was merely the architecture's geriatric complaints, the groans of settling timbers, the wind's mournful area through the eaves during squalls. Still, moments existed when phantom footfalls seemed to echo in deserted chambers, when peripheral vision snagged on fleeting, substanceless motion. Dispelling the lingering fog of sleep with a shake of my head, I swung my legs out, the shock of cold hardwood biting at my bare soles. I traversed the guest suite toward the adjoining bath, the chill seeping upward. Cool water splashed against my face offered little solace against the dream's residue. As my hand reached for a towel, a soft thump resonated from somewhere deep within the house's core, arresting my movement. Breath held captive, ears strained against the profound quiet. Silence reigned, absolute. And then, again, a muffled impact, the clumsy fall of something substantial. Is someone there? My voice, a fragile thread in the cavernous space, elicited no reply. Solitude was the contract, the expectation, or so it should be. I retreated from the bathroom's sterile light, eyes probing the bedroom's chiaroscuro landscape. Nothing overtly disturbed, yet the moonbeams lancing through the tall windows carved shadows that seemed suddenly deeper, imbued with latent menace. Another thud, this one sharper, louder, undeniably originating from the floor below. A frantic pulse drummed in my throat. "Call the authorities," reason urged, but the counter-argument followed swiftly. Report what? Unsubstantiated noises in an ancient, creaking structure. Instead, propelled by a morbid magnetism I couldn't dissect, I found myself drifting toward the bedroom door. The corridor beyond was an abyss, darkness so profound it felt tactile, viscous. Fumbling for my phone, I ignited its meager luminescence, a fragile beacon against the oppressive gloom as I crept towards the grand staircase. The sentinel clock maintained its relentless cadence, each tick an agonizing stretch of time. Descending, the venerable wood groaned under my weight, each protest a betrayal I feared would alert whatever or whoever lurked below. Reaching the landing, my phone's light feebly illuminated the expansive foyer. To the left lay the drawing room. The dining salon waited to the right. Straight ahead, the kitchen passage yawned. From which direction had the disturbance emanated? A whisper-faint rustle from the drawing room dictated my path. With my heart lodged somewhere near my collarbone, I edged towards the arched entrance, one hand tracing the textured wallpaper, searching for the switch. Finding it, I flicked it upwards. Light flooded the space, painfully bright after the encompassing dark, momentarily blinding me. I blinked fiercely, vision swimming. When the world resolved, a strangled cry died in my throat. Chaos reigned. Furniture lay overturned like fallen beasts. Books erupted from shelves. Objets d'art scattered like shrapnel across the Persian rug. And poised amidst the wreckage stood nothing, an emptiness. I blinked again, convinced of illusion, or rather the absence of illusion, because in that fleeting incandescent instant before my eyes adjusted, I'd perceived a shape, tall, ill-defined, more condensed shadow than solid form. Now, only the disarray remained. Hello? I ventured again, my voice a tremulous reed. Is anyone present? Silence answered, profound and suffocating. Even the clock's steady beat seemed unable to penetrate this room's vacuum. Hesitantly, I stepped across the threshold. Glass crunched beneath my bare foot. A sharp hiss escaped my lips as I looked down, the fractured remnants of a silver picture frame. The photograph within depicted the Ashworths, patriarch, matriarch, two smiling children captured in a moment of posed felicity. But as I watched, transfixed, the image seemed to liquefy, the smiles contorting into silent screams, the eyes darkening into hollow voids. I recoiled with a choked gasp, the frame clattering away. When I dared look again, the photograph was placid, the family's frozen grins undisturbed. Rubbing my eyes, I wondered if sleep still held me, ensnared in some grotesque waking hallucination. It was then I felt it, an icy exhalation upon the nape of my neck, prickling my skin into a constellation of goose flesh. I spun around. Nothing. Only the vacant doorway, the Stygian hallway stretching beyond. This isn't amusing, I addressed the empty air, forcing indignation into my tone to camouflage the rising tide of fear. If you're here, reveal yourself. As if summoned, a low ululation curled through the house, sourceless yet omnipresent. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish, sending glacial tremors down my spine. I backed away instinctively, my heel catching the leg of an overturned occasional table. I stumbled, crashing heavily onto my back. The impact expelled the air from my lungs, leaving me momentarily stunned, gasping. When breath returned, I pushed myself onto my elbows and froze. There, limned against the far wall, stood the figure glimpsed before. More shadow than substance, its silhouette blurred at the edges, yet the vague outline of a head, shoulders, and arms hanging inertly was discernible. I scrambled backward, a silent scream clawing at my throat. The entity remained motionless, seemingly oblivious, swaying faintly as if stirred by an imperceptible current. "What are you?" the question emerged ragged, barely audible. The figure's head pivoted towards me, though no features resolved within its tenebrous visage. For an eternity compressed into seconds, we held that gaze, a tableau of raw fear meeting something else. Melancholy? A deep, abiding longing? The emotion radiating from the spectral form defied easy categorization. Then, with the abruptness of a snuffed candle, it vanished. One moment present, the next utterly gone, leaving me solitary amidst the ruin. I remained seated on the floor for an immeasurable time, breath catching in shallow, rapid bursts, eyes darting frantically, searching for any trace of the spectral visitor. Nothing. Only the violated furniture, the scattered detritus, and the crushing silence. Slowly, legs trembling violently, I regained my feet. Escape was paramount. Contact someone. The Ashworths, the constabulary, a cleric, anyone. Yet, as I turned towards the exit, movement snagged my attention. One of the dislodged books lay open on the floor. Even as I watched, its pages began to flutter, turning faster and faster, caught in an invisible gale, though the room's air remained utterly still. Against all rational instinct, drawn by that same inexplicable curiosity, I moved closer. The frantic flipping ceased as suddenly as it began, the book settling open to a particular spread. I leaned forward, squinting in the dimness. It was a local chronicle, I discerned, and there, circled in a smear that looked chillingly like desiccated blood, was a passage concerning this very house, the Ashworth estate. It spoke of its construction in 1887 by Silas Blackwood, of persistent rumors regarding its haunting. Local lore recounted a devastating fire in 1902 that tragically consumed Blackwood's wife and 2 young children. Blackwood himself vanished soon after, swallowed by history. Some whispered he succumbed to grief. Others maintained his spirit still roamed these halls, perpetually seeking reunion with his lost family. An Arctic current traced my spine as the words registered. I recalled the violated photograph, the smiles twisting into torment. Could it be true? Was this house truly inhabited? A soft stir behind me caused me to whirl. There, hovering in the doorway, were not 1 but 4 translucent shapes. A tall one, presumably Silas Blackwood, flanked by 3 smaller forms, his wife, his children. They remained immobile, unspeaking, simply observing me with sightless eyes. I felt the palpable weight of their collective gaze, dense with decades of solitude and sorrow. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the apology encompassing a depth of unknowing. "I didn't realize." The figures seemed to incline their heads in near unison, a gesture perhaps of acknowledgement, perhaps of absolution. Then gradually they began to attenuate, growing increasingly transparent until they dissolved entirely into the ambient air. The sentinel clock in the hall chimed once more, 1 Eros a.m. Had merely an hour elapsed? It felt an age. My legs gave way, and I sank to the floorboards again. The house was quiet now, but the quality of the silence had transformed, no longer oppressive, but imbued with a tranquil stillness, as if a long-held, unbearable tension had finally dissipated. I don't know how long I sat there, adrift in the aftermath, processing the impossible. As the first tentative fingers of dawn probed the tall windows, I stirred, my body protesting with stiffness and aches. Leave, practicality insisted. Call the Ashworths, tell them, what? Their ancestral home is host to specters? That you suffered a psychotic break and demolished their drawing room? Neither prospect held appeal. But as I rose, something arrested me. A subtle shift, an intuition whispering against reason. This place, these sorrowful essences, they weren't malevolent. They were adrift, isolated, yearning for comprehension. My gaze swept over the disordered room, and a decision coalesced within me. I would remain. I would restore order to this chaos, and I would delve deeper into the history of the Blackwood family. Perhaps, just perhaps, I could facilitate the peace they had sought for over a century. Beginning the task, righting an overturned chair, I felt a distinct warmth envelop me, akin to a gentle, unseen embrace, and I knew with a certainty that defied logic that the choice was right. This house, repository of secrets and sorrow, had somehow selected me, and I would endeavor to honor that trust. The last of my cardboard sarcophagi scraped across the threshold of the constricted apartment when the building superintendent, Mr. Silas, intercepted me, his visage etched with an unsettling gravity. He gestured toward a diminutive aperture in the living area. "That window," he stated, voice low, "never latch it fully shut." My eyes traced the frame, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, wood swollen and protesting its confines, a latch seemingly forged from rust and wishful thinking, poised to disintegrate under minimal pressure. The directive felt archaic, nonsensical. Already a sly current of air snaked past the sill, stirring dust motes across the weary floorboards. I offered a compliant nod, a silent promise I had no intention of keeping, my mind already devising methods to seal the intrusive draft. My second night dissolved into weariness, frayed by the persistent susurrus of air whispering through the gap. Enough. I twisted the antiquated latch. It offered a grating protest, a shriek of metal on corroded metal, a sound dormant for untold seasons, before finally clicking into its locked position. No guilt pricked me, only the profound desire for uninterrupted slumber. Mr. Silas's caution faded into the realm of quaint superstition. I recall patting the glass once, a dismissive gesture. "That's that," I might have murmured. Hours later, suspended in the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, I was jolted upright by heavy thuds. They emanated from the vicinity of the living room window. My initial thought, a neighbor's carelessly slammed door, dissolved as the impacts persisted, a frantic, rhythmic battery. Thud, thud, thud. My heart hammered a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Disorientation fogged my senses. Behind the closed door of my bedroom I couldn't see, but the sound was unmistakable. Something striking wood with violent insistence. Thud, thud, thud. Pulse throbbing a frantic cadence in my ears, I knew, with chilling certainty, the source was that accursed window. Tossing aside the covers, I hastened from the room, navigating the shadowed corridor as the banging intensified. My mouth felt like parchment, My arms hung rigid at my sides. Seizing the doorknob, I turned it with deliberate slowness and stepped into the living room's oppressive darkness. The window was flung wide open, bucking against its frame like a captive thing as gusts of wind surged inward, rattling the glass hysterically. It looked violated, forced. My fingers fumbled for the overhead light switch. An ancient fixture flickered, then cast a hesitant, jaundiced glow. The window continued its furious slamming, yet the room was undeniably empty. I advanced cautiously, every sinew coiled tight. The pulse in my ears felt deafening. A peculiar vibration, an electric hum, began just left of my sternum. My breaths came short and sharp. The invading air was glacial, raising goose flesh. Grasping the violently shuddering window frame, I fought to pull it closed. It resisted, stuck fast for a terrifying moment, then yielded with a grudging groan. Fear thrummed through me, a sickening bass note, but I wrestled the latch back to its original state. Partially open, precisely as Mr. Silas had instructed. Instantly, the banging ceased. Silence descended, thick and suffocating, crawling over my skin. Sleep, when it eventually came, was shallow and haunted by phantom echoes of pounding. Morning arrived with a dull ache behind my eyes, the residue of profound unrest. Mr. Silas was conspicuously absent. I opted for avoidance, brewing coffee, attempting to rationalize the night's events as wind-vexing weakened wood. A part of me desperately craved normalcy, yet the unease lingered. Throughout the day, engaged in the mundane rituals of settling in, stocking cupboards, scrubbing aged countertops, wiping grime from glass panes, my gaze kept returning to that small living room window, half expecting it to erupt open of its own volition. As dusk bled into night, an unshakable tension settled between my shoulder blades. I retreated to bed early. The apartment felt unnervingly still, yet the memory of the percussive assault refused to fade. I tried reading, then scrolled aimlessly through my phone, but a fine tremor persisted in my hands. Around midnight, a soft creak whispered from the living room. The building settling, I told myself, though the knot in my chest tightened anew. I remained rigid beneath the blankets, forcing stillness. The hours stretched interminably before exhaustion finally claimed me. In the morning, drawn by a morbid curiosity, I approached the window. The moment I neared the sill, that familiar, disconcerting prickle returned to my chest like static beneath the skin. Ignoring it felt impossible. I pushed the window fully open, seeking fresh air, perhaps clarity. Gazing down, I experienced the distinct, unsettling sensation of being observed. Impossible. My apartment was on the 4th floor, overlooking a sheer drop to the refuse-strewn courtyard below. And yet, I swore I perceived a flicker, a distortion against the weathered brick opposite, a silhouette, dark and ill-defined. It vanished like smoke, leaving only gooseflesh prickling my arms. I recoiled, breath catching in my throat. With trembling hands, I slammed the window shut to its halfway point and secured the latch. Stepping back, I walked away, forcing myself into tasks, trash disposal, closet organization, anything to distract from the feeling that the window itself was watching, waiting. Hours later, needing escape, I grabbed my keys for a walk. Circling the block, I observed the building's melancholic edifice, its bricks stained with time, tendrils of ivy crawling like grasping fingers. My apartment faced the narrow, shadowed courtyard, confirming the lack of any ledge or foothold near my window. The shape, I reasoned, must have been a trick of light, a shadow contorting itself. Upon returning, Mr. Silas was sorting mail near the entrance. He offered a fleeting acknowledgement, his eyes skittering away. The impulse to question him about the window rose, then withered under a wave of self-consciousness. How could I articulate fears of phantom shapes without sounding unhinged? I merely waved and ascended the stairs. That evening, determined to reclaim my living space, I settled in to watch television, bathing the room in artificial light. Around 10, a subtle draft stirred the air, accompanied by a soft rattling from the window. My throat constricted. Turning down the volume, I listened intently. The rattling intensified, the glass vibrating as if pressured from without. I rose, moving toward it one deliberate step at a time, ankles stiff, the floorboards complaining beneath my weight. The instant I reached the window, the rattling ceased. My hand rested on the sill. The wood felt unnaturally cold, damp. Outside, the dirty courtyard glowed faintly under a distant street lamp. Then a flicker at the edge of vision. Something shifted along the opposite wall, perhaps 10 feet from my window. It resembled a figure, indistinct, yet it moved with an impossible silence. My heart threatened to detonate within my chest. I blinked, and it was gone. Leaning forward, nose almost touching the glass, I scanned the dark, quiet courtyard. Empty. Yet my arms shook uncontrollably, and sweat beaded at the nape of my neck. Retreating, I paced the confines of the living room. The urge to call someone, anyone, was potent. But who? The police? Officer, there's a shape that isn't there outside my 4th floor window. Madness. I resolved to stay awake, lights blazing, perched on the couch, arms wrapped around my knees. A reluctant sentinel. Sometime after 2 in the morning, exhaustion ambushed me, pulling me into a fitful doze. The following day, I cornered Mr. Silas as he fumbled with keys at the building's maintenance closet. "Mr. Silas," I began, my voice tighter than intended. "What's the story with that window? Is something wrong with it?" Pallor flooded his features. His gaze darted away before returning, unfocused. He mumbled something about old buildings, old ways. He admitted knowledge of previous tenants, their swift departures, but offered no specifics. His reluctance, a palpable wall. Before I could press further, he shuffled off, leaving me steeped in a deeper disquiet. That night, passivity felt unbearable. I would not simply wait. I reinforced the window's halfway position with strips of heavy tape, ensuring it couldn't swing or rattle. Then I placed a small lamp on a nearby table, casting its defiant glow toward the sill. Seating myself in a chair directly facing it, I began my vigil. Around midnight, a scraping sound began, faint, insidious, like fingernails drawn across wood. I held my breath. The tightness returned to my chest, my fingertips tingling ominously. Cold sweat trickled down my spine. My eyes remained locked on the glass. The scraping intensified, evolving into the sound of something sharp being dragged along the exterior frame. My hands clenched the arms of the chair, knuckles white. A primal urge screamed at me to fling the window open, to confront whatever lurked outside, but terror held me immobile. The scraping morphed into a series of light, distinct taps against the pane. Knuckles rapping on the glass, it sounded like directly at eye level. Tap, tap, tap. Impossible. No ledge, no balcony, nothing. Yet the tapping persisted. My heart hammered with such ferocity, I felt a sharp cramp beneath my ribs. With monumental effort, I forced myself to stand. A shaky step forward. My own breathing roared in my ears, throat utterly dry. Tap, tap, tap. Hesitantly, I reached out, touching the glass. A faint vibration registered against my fingertips, confirming the physical reality of the knocking. I snatched my hand back as if burned. The tapping stopped. Absolute silence descended, broken only by the buzzing in my ears. For several seconds, I couldn't move. Then abruptly, a powerful gust seemed to materialize from nowhere, ripping the tape free, snapping the latch backward. The window flew inward with a deafening bang. Frigid night air rushed into the room, thick with a cloying, musty odor. I stumbled backward, nearly collapsing over the chair. The lamp flickered precariously. My gaze shot to the gaping window. Nothing. Just the black void of the night sky and the shadowed geometry of the courtyard far below. Lunging forward, I grabbed the violently shuddering frame, my mind screaming one imperative. Close it, back to the halfway point. I couldn't see anything, yet I felt it, an oppressive presence, an invisible weight crushing my chest. My arms trembled violently as I fought the window back into its designated position. The moment the latch clicked home, the wind ceased as suddenly as it had begun. Panting, legs weak, I backed away. Fleeing to the bedroom, I slammed the door shut. The tingling in my chest pulsed in morbid rhythm with my racing heart. Huddled beneath the covers, bedside lamp casting stark shadows, I stared at the door, every creak and groan of the old building amplifying my terror. I remained there, rigid, until the first gray fingers of dawn crept beneath the curtains. When I finally emerged, I felt hollowed out, moving like an automaton. In the days that followed, I forged a tense truce with the window. I ceased interfering with the latch. I maintained its half-open state, a concession mandated by Mr. Silas and ratified by terror. Faint scraping and tapping still whispered at the edges of the night, but they never escalated to the previous violence. I stopped looking outside, actively averting my gaze. Curiosity warred with a primal fear I couldn't afford to indulge. My sole objective became minimizing the disturbances enough to achieve some semblance of sleep. One evening, drifting past the living room, a peripheral flicker snagged my attention. Something moved outside, ascending the wall. I froze, then against all instinct, edged closer to the glass, heart pounding a familiar frantic rhythm, close enough now to discern a dark shape adhering to the brickwork. Featureless, yet undeniably a figure. It clung there, utterly silent, before sliding fluidly out of view. A scream lodged in my throat, voiceless. A burning sensation bloomed in my chest. Slowly, deliberately, I backed away until my legs hit the couch. Deep breaths did little to quell the internal storm. Don't look again. Now each passage past that window triggers a jolt of anxiety, the familiar electric prickle across my torso. It remains perpetually ajar, regardless of weather. Locking it fully is unthinkable. I avoid that corner of the room after dark. If tapping commences, I raise the volume on the television or retreat to my bedroom. If I sense movement beyond the glass, I turn away. Sometimes I awaken in the dead of night, ears ringing, convinced I heard banging, but I remain in bed, heart pounding, until sleep reclaims me or the sun rises. Moving is a complex proposition. The lease binds me for a year. Finances are tight, alternatives elusive. Mr. Silas maintains his distance. The window remains our unspoken, unsettling secret. I doubt I possess the fortitude for another confrontation with whatever clings to that outer wall. This much I know. That window will never again be fully closed by my hand. Lesson learned. If it demands this compromise, this perpetual vulnerability, then so be it. I will not test it again. Consider this a cautionary tale. Should you find yourself in an old building, warned about a particular window by someone with haunted eyes, listen. It might just preserve your sleep, if not your sanity. The first pulse of incandescence blooming in the rearview mirror brought a fragile sigh of relief. The second, a tighter twin beam coiled unease deep in my belly. By the third spectral glare, a certainty colder than the midnight air settled over me. Those approaching lumens promised no deliverance. Only a species of dread my mind had never before dared to conjure. My name is Ilara. What began as a prosaic pilgrimage to my parents' home for the holiday feast unspooled into a phantasmagoria that still splinters my sleep. Just a simple nocturnal transit it should have been. Myself, my husband Julian, and our slumbering children, Leo, 10, and Maya, 7, cocooned in the back seat. We'd traced this route countless times, yet never under such a depth of night. Julian's work had chained us late, and the vast, inky corridor of rural highway connecting the cities swallowed us whole well past the witching hour. The children dreamt. Julian and I traded watches at the helm, battling exhaustion. I held the wheel when the world tilted. One instant, the smooth thrum of the engine, the radio whispering low melodies. The next, a strangled cough from beneath the hood, a faltering momentum. "What's happening?" Julian surfaced from his shallow doze, voice thick with sleep. My brow furrowed. I pressed the accelerator, a useless gesture against the car's determined deceleration. "I don't know. Something's wrong." We ghosted onto the road's gravel shoulder, the velvet maw of night pressing close, absolute. Julian twisted the key. The engine answered with only a mournful click, click, click. "Blast it," he breathed, retrieving his phone. No bars, naturally. A knot of disquiet tightened within me. Stranded leagues from any known habitation, bereft of communication. The highway ribboned into blackness fore and aft, an empty stage. It was then I perceived it, the nascent glimmer of headlights far behind us. Relief, potent and swift, surged through me. Someone approached. Salvation was at hand. "Look," I urged Julian, pointing. "Perhaps they can assist." We exited the vehicle, silhouettes against the void, waving our arms as the lights swelled. Yet as they drew nearer, a dissonance arose. The beams felt too piercing, positioned strangely high, their trajectory unsteady, weaving almost drunkenly side to side. The knot in my stomach cinched painfully. This wasn't right. Just as the vehicle seemed poised to reach us, it executed a violent, abrupt swerve, rocketing past, its taillights dwindling instantly into the oppressive dark. "What in God's name?" Julian murmured, staring into the emptiness it left behind. Before I could shape a response, new headlights materialized, approaching from the opposite direction. This time, a conventional sedan slowed, its window descending to reveal an older gentleman. "Everything all right, folks?" "Our car's given up the ghost," I explained, words tumbling out. "Might we possibly use your phone to summon aid?" The man's concerned visage curdled into stark fear. "You need to vacate this area. Immediately." "What? Why?" Julian asked, bewildered. The man cast a frantic glance down the deserted highway. "There's been whispers, happenings along this stretch, disappearances, peculiar lights. Look, you simply don't want to be caught out here when darkness falls." A glacial tremor traced my spine. "What do you mean, happenings?" His window was already ascending. "Apologies, I cannot linger. Best of luck." With a squeal of tires, he vanished, leaving us once more adrift in the profound silence and encroaching terror. Julian and I exchanged a look freighted with disbelief and a swiftly metastasizing fear. What had the man intimated, and what recourse remained? That's when the third set of headlights manifested. They sprang into existence, impossibly close, bearing down on us with predatory velocity. "Into the car!" I shrieked, wrenching the door open, tumbling inside. Julian barely cleared the threshold before the pursuing vehicle howled past, missing our inert car by a hair's breadth. The children startled awake, disoriented, frightened. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Leo's voice was a small, trembling thread in the sudden chaos. "It's all right, sweetling," I managed, striving for a calm I didn't possess. "Just a spot of car trouble. Everything is perfectly fine." Even as the lie left my lips, my eyes registered more lights blooming in the distance. Not one or two pairs now, but a multitude, converging upon us. "Julian," I whispered, my voice vibrating, "we have to leave, now." He nodded, his face a pale mask in the dashboard's eerie glow. "I'll try the ignition again." As he turned the key, my gaze remained fixed on the approaching swarm. Closer now, close enough to discern that these were no ordinary conveyances. Some rode too high, others skimmed unnervingly low, their movements erratic, unnatural. A bizarre ballet of weaving, bobbing predators closing in. The engine sputtered, choked, then miraculously erupted into a defiant roar. Julian wasted no fraction of a second. He slammed the gear shift into drive, tires spitting gravel as we surged back onto the asphalt. "Mommy, I'm scared," Maya whimpered from the dark sanctuary of the back seat. "It's okay, little bird," I soothed, reaching back, my fingers finding her small hand. "We're going to be fine." But the reflection in the rearview mirror screamed betrayal. The lights pursued, relentless, gaining. and now between the blinding beams I could perceive shapes coalescing in the gloom. Immense malformed silhouettes loping alongside the strange, luminous craft. Julian pushed our vehicle to its absolute limit, the engine screaming a high-pitched protest, yet it wasn't sufficient. The lights drew nearer. With them came a sound, a low, resonant hum that vibrated deep within my bones, a subsonic thrumming that resonated through the very chassis of the car. "What are they?" Leo breathed, his face pressed tight against the rear glass. "Don't look," I commanded sharply. "Just don't look." The hum intensified, swallowing the engine's cry, the rush of wind becoming an all-consuming presence. My head swam, vision blurred at the edges. Then abruptly, utter blackness descended. Dashboard instruments, our own headlights, the pursuing glare, all extinguished in a single, terrifying instant. We were plunged into a void more profound than simple night. A heartbeat of pure silence reigned. Then a blinding, incandescent flood poured down from above, searing through the roof, painfully bright. I squeezed my eyes shut against the onslaught. I felt the car levitate, lifting smoothly off the tarmac. The children were screaming. Julian shouted words lost in the deafening, omnipresent hum. My ears popped with the ascent. Pressure clamped down on my chest, stealing breath. Just as consciousness threatened to fray, everything ceased. The light, the sound, the sensation of rising, obliterated in a moment. Slowly, tentatively, I opened my eyes, blinking against the sudden re-immersion in darkness. We were back on the shoulder, the car idling placidly, as if the preceding minutes had been a shared hallucination. The highway stretched ahead, vacant, blessedly ordinary. Is everyone all right?" I croaked, my voice raw. Shaky affirmations answered from Julian and the children. Physically unscathed, it seemed, but psychically fractured. "What happened?" Leo asked, his voice small again. "Were those things from space?" "I don't know, my love," I admitted, the truth heavy and cold. "I truly don't know." We drove the remaining distance in a brittle silence, each distant pair of headlights triggering a fresh jolt of adrenaline. Yet nothing further disturbed the pre-dawn stillness. We reached my parents' home as the first tentative fingers of sunrise painted the horizon, utterly spent, bewildered. In the ensuing days, we circled the event, attempting to impose logic on the illogical. Online searches yielded whispers, local legends surrounding that desolate highway stretch, strange lights, missing persons, but nothing congruent with the sheer visceral extremity of our encounter. Reporting it felt futile. Who would lend credence to such a tale? We possessed no tangible proof, only the shared, indelible scar on our memories. But the memory endured, a persistent phantom. Nightmares plagued the children for months. Julian and I developed an aversion to nocturnal travel, and the simple act of glancing into a rearview mirror after dark became forever fraught with a primal caution. Years have drifted by, the phenomenon never recurred. Yet sometimes driving alone on a lightless road, a peculiar configuration of lights will appear in my mirror, and for a sickening instant, I am transported back, back to that highway, the hum vibrating in my marrow, the ice of pure terror gripping my heart. What visited us that night remains an enigma. Extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or something far stranger, something utterly beyond the lexicon of human understanding. Certainty eludes me, perhaps forever. But this much I know. The night is not the empty, passive backdrop we assume. Entities reside within its folds, watchers in the shadows, and sometimes, just sometimes, they extend a tendril into our perceived reality. When they do, all that remains is to cling fiercely to the familiar and pray for the dawn. So, the next time you find yourself navigating a lonely expanse of darkened road, and unfamiliar lights blossom in your mirror, attend closely, for you cannot know if they herald merely another traveler or something else entirely, journeying through the deep night. The specter first insinuated itself into my awareness within the digital confines of a beach selfie, a mere smudge against the bruised orange canvas of the descending sun, almost lost on the far horizon. A visual artifact, nothing more I'd thought then. But later that evening, cocooned in my apartment, adrift in the phosphorescent glow of my phone screen, a cold dread began its insidious unspooling as I scrolled. The identical silhouette, a persistent shadow stain, marred every photograph captured that day. It was meant to be an escape, a solitary pilgrimage to the coast, seeking ablution from weeks of corrosive workplace stress. Dawn had barely cracked the sky when I'd pointed my car towards the sea, drawn by the promise of near-empty sands. Perfection unfolded, sunlight like warm honey, a zephyr whispering salt-laced secrets, the rhythmic sigh of waves kissing the shore. Hours dissolved as I traced the tide line, my pockets filling with oceanic treasures, my phone documenting the quietude. I rarely turned the lens upon myself, but the profound peace of the place seemed to demand a witness. So I framed myself against the vast, indifferent backdrop of the water, capturing fleeting moments. Only upon returning home, limbs heavy with pleasant fatigue, yet mind strangely buoyant, did I truly examine the day's photographic harvest. Idly thumbing through the gallery while awaiting the arrival of delivered sustenance, my gaze snagged. An early shot, a selfie, revealed it. A dark punctuation mark just beyond my left shoulder, hovering where sea met sky. I narrowed my eyes, willing the pixels into clarity. A distant vessel? A trick of the light? Perhaps a smear upon the glass eye of the camera? Curiosity piqued. I magnified the image. Resolution failed me. The shape remained stubbornly nebulous, yet disturbingly anthropomorphic. A swimmer braving the deeper waters. Unlikely. I recalled no one venturing so far out. A mental shrug, and I continued my digital perusal. But frame followed frame, and with each swipe, an icy tendril tightened around my spine. The shape persisted, in every single image, sometimes a remote speck, barely discernible. Other times it loomed nearer, its contours sharpening, solidifying, always maintaining the same spatial relationship to me, a silent, unwavering satellite orbiting my solitary movements. My fingers, suddenly clumsy, trembled as they flew across the screen. There and there again, lurking behind the intricate architecture of a whelk I'd admired, ghosting the crest of a dune in a wide landscape vista, its presence even reflected, impossibly small, in the mirrored curve of my sunglasses in a close-up. How? How had its presence utterly escaped my notice in the tangible world? My mind scrabbled, desperate for a memory, any memory, of another soul sharing that desolate stretch of sand. But there was none. Its emptiness was the very reason for its choosing. Solitude. I was certain. The final photograph froze the marrow in my bones. Another self-portrait, captured just moments before departure, the sun bleeding fire across the horizon behind me. And there, dramatically closer than in any preceding image, stood the figure, still wreathed in twilight's gloom, yet undeniably possessing the silhouette of a head, of shoulders. Though its face remained obscured, an unnerving certainty washed over me. It was gazing directly into the lens, directly at me. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering against the floor as if scorched by an unseen flame. This wasn't rational. An explanation had to exist. A camera malfunction, some bizarre optical phenomenon, a persistent lens flare mimicking form. Yet, a deeper, more primal knowing rejected these flimsy comforts. The figure's consistency, its deliberate, watchful positioning, felt chillingly intentional. Sleep became a foreign country that night. Each time my eyelids fluttered shut, the shadowy form materialized against the darkness, eternally vigilant, eternally present. I berated myself. Absurdity, imagination fevered by exhaustion, a tapestry woven from coincidence. Surely the crisp logic of morning, the clarifying power of daylight, would banish these phantoms. I resolved to confront the images again. In the sunlit sanity of a new day, the absurdity would be laid bare. But as the gallery application bloomed on the screen, my heart hammered against my ribs, threatening escape. The beach photographs remained, yes, but they were altered, transformed. The figure had advanced. In every shot it occupied a closer proximity, no longer content with the periphery. In some, the vaguest suggestion of features emerged. Shadowed depressions where eyes should be, a stark line that hinted at a mouth. And in that last, terrible sunset selfie, it stood directly behind my image. A hand outstretched, skeletal fingers poised as if to alight upon my shoulder. I hurled the phone across the room. It struck the wall with a sickening crack. Breath hitched in my throat, ragged and shallow. Impossible. Photographs don't rewrite themselves. My sanity surely was fraying, unraveling at the seams. A desperate need for external validation, for a rational counterpoint, seized me. Retrieving the phone with hands that shook violently, I dialed Chloe, my staunchest friend. She absorbed my fractured narrative, my voice thin and reedy with hysteria barely held in check. "All right," she said, her tone measured and calm when my torrent of words finally subsided. "Stay put. I'm coming over. We'll look together. We'll figure this out." The 30 minutes before her arrival stretched into an unbearable eternity. I paced the confines of my apartment, a caged animal startled by every creak and groan of the building, convinced that any moment a turn of my head would reveal the spectral watcher standing silently behind me. When Chloe's knock finally echoed, I practically tore the door from its hinges, pulling her inside. "See?" I implored, shoving the phone towards her. "Tell me you see it. Tell me I haven't lost my mind." Concern etched lines onto her forehead as she accepted the device. I watched her face, a study in concentration, searching for the flicker of shock, the dawning horror I expected. Nothing. Her expression remained placidly neutral. "Ilara," she began gently. "What exactly am I supposed to be seeing?" She scrolled slowly. "These are just beach photos. Quite lovely ones, actually." The floor seemed to dissolve beneath me. "You don't? The figure, the shadow person, it's following me in every single picture." Chloe met my gaze, her eyes brimming with troubled solicitude. "Sweetie, there's no one else here. It's just you. You and the ocean." I snatched the phone back, eyes wide with disbelief, swiping frantically through the gallery. She was right. Utterly, terrifyingly right. The figure had vanished. The photographs were pristine, innocuous records of a solitary day by the sea. "But it was there," I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "I swear to God, Chloe, it was there. Getting closer. Always closer." Chloe placed a steadying hand on my arm. "Ilara, listen. You've been under immense pressure. Maybe you just need a proper break. A real one, not just a frantic day trip." I nodded, numb, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Had I hallucinated the entire ordeal? Was this the shape of a mind fracturing under strain? Chloe lingered, brewing tea, her voice a soothing balm as she steered the conversation towards the mundane. By the time she departed, a fragile semblance of logic had reasserted itself. Stress, sleep deprivation, an imagination running riot. Plausible explanations abounded. That night, emotionally scoured but marginally calmer, I resolved to delete the offending images. Their presence was a toxic reminder, feeding the anxieties I desperately needed to quell. It was time to excise this digital ghost. I navigated to the gallery, my thumb poised above the command to select all. But before contact could be made, a new thumbnail materialized at the very top, a photograph utterly alien to my memory, yet horrifyingly familiar. It depicted my bedroom as it existed in that precise moment, with me perched on the edge of the mattress, phone clutched in my hand. And there, framed starkly in the open doorway, stood the figure. No longer spectral, but chillingly corporeal. Impossibly tall, emaciated, its skin possessing the crazed, fragile texture of cracked porcelain, its eyes voids of utter blackness. It was smiling, a dreadful cavernous rictus splitting its face nearly in two. My head lifted, a slow, agonizing pivot, every muscle screaming protest. The physical doorway stood empty, yet as my gaze swept back, a flicker registered at the edge of my vision. Just an instant, a heartbeat, but I saw it. The figure, identical to the image on the phone, standing sentinel at the foot of my bed. A scream tore from my lungs, raw and primal, tasting of copper. I screamed as I fled the apartment, bare feet slapping against the cool floorboards, pajamas clinging to my trembling frame. I screamed as my fists hammered against neighbors' doors, a desperate cacophony pleading for sanctuary, for witness, for help. When the uniformed officers arrived, summoned by the commotion, the figure was gone. Their methodical search yielded nothing. No forced entry, no trace of an intruder. The terrifying photograph, too, had evaporated from my phone's memory. Once again, I was left stranded on the shores of perceived madness. Remaining in that apartment was unthinkable. The following day I decamped, seeking refuge on Chloe's sofa while the search for a new dwelling commenced. My phone, my laptop, any device harboring a lens became objects of profound terror, swiftly disposed of. Mirrors became adversaries, their reflective surfaces holding the potential for nightmarish revelations. Months have bled into one another since then. There are days, blessedly lucid stretches, where I managed to convince myself it was a waking nightmare, a vivid phantasm conjured by an overburdened mind. But then, the corner of my eye will catch a fleeting shadow, mimicking human form in a shop window's reflection, or I'll glimpse a flash of impossible pallor amidst a bustling crowd, and the certainty returns, cold and absolute, settling deep within my bones. It is still present, still observing, still pursuing. And the question echoes relentlessly in the quiet spaces. What happens when it finally closes the distance? Elias secured this cavernous loft within the husk of an old edifice just last month. The allure wasn't architectural charm, but pragmatism. Negligible rent and ample territory for his sprawling gear. The proprietor, a man prone to anecdotes, had flagged the building's centerpiece, a sinuous iron staircase, relic of its industrial genesis decades prior. A mere curiosity then, swallowed by the urgency of finding shelter. Now hindsight gnaws. He wishes he'd probed deeper into the staircase's nocturnal character, its unsettling transformations after dusk. His domain occupies the third tier. At the building's core, the helix of iron and wood ascends, a skeletal spine connecting the ground floor to the sixth. His inaugural climb revealed steps constrictingly narrow, each footfall coaxing not a quaint squeak, but a discordant groan from the aged timber, a sound like stressed sinew. The iron balustrade, perpetually frigid, offered a chilling handhold beneath flaking paint that wept onto the steps. A miasma of dampness clung to the air. Neglected undeniably, yet its structural defiance remained palpable. Elias furnished the space sparsely. A mattress angled in one corner, a work table near the vast, dust-streaked windows, a worn settee aimed at the entryway. Soaring ceilings and those colossal windows bathed the loft in innocuous daylight. But nightfall draped the edifice in profound quietude. Neighborly sounds evaporated. The city's pulse outside dwindled to nothingness past 10. Only the spectral hum of plumbing within the walls disturbed the hush, a silence that thickened, becoming unnerving as midnight approached. His nocturnal habits, fueled by screen glow and solitary work, often led him downstairs for sustenance from the lobby's humming machine. It was during one such pre-dawn pilgrimage, a round one, that the staircase revealed its anomaly. Descending, he glanced into the spiral's void, the chasm plunging towards the ground floor. A single anemic bulb overhead fractured the gloom, sculpting a peculiar darkness in the central space, an amorphous shadow that seemed to writhe, yet no form stood below to cast it. He leaned, peered, saw nothing. A trick of ancient wiring flickering incandescence. His mind supplied plausible excuses. He pressed onward, the protesting groans of the treads suddenly seeming to find a disturbing rhythm, mirroring the anxious thrumming in his own chest. The shadow below pulsed in time. A knot cinched tight beneath his ribs. Snatching a snack, he retreated upwards with unnerving haste. Days bled into nights, the memory lingering like a bad taste. Though he fought it, an unshakable sense of scrutiny clung to him on the stairs. The wooden lamentations beneath his feet took on that same unnerving cadence, a beat synchronized with his own quickening pulse, raising gooseflesh along his arms. He considered the building's rattling freight elevator, a shuddering cage prone to jarring halts between floors. After one particularly unsettling journey in the clanking metal box, he deemed the stairs the lesser evil, their psychological menace preferable to mechanical peril. A week festered. Another nocturnal craving struck near 2. Stepping from his loft, he found the corridor light extinguished. Pushing through the stairwell door plunged him into near total darkness, save for a lone, sickly bulb bleeding faint light from the floor above. The air felt thick. His heart hammered against his ribs as his foot met the first step. A sharp crack split the silence. Down in the core, the shadow loomed, perceptibly larger this time, more substantial. He clung to the frigid rail, descending into the abyss. Each tread screamed louder than before. His breath hitched. A low thrumming vibrated through the soles of his feet, as if the entire structure resonated with his fear. Midway, he risked another glance. The dark mass quivered, convulsed. Clammy sweat beaded on his palms, his gut clenched. Reaching the lobby brought a gasp of transient relief. He contemplated bivouacking on the threadbare lobby sofa till dawn, but dismissed the thought. The ascent began. His footsteps were dull impacts against the wood, his throat parchment dry. The cold iron felt welded to his grip. Now the shadow below seemed sentient, swaying, reacting to his pauses, exerting an almost physical pull. His pulse roared in his ears. Focusing solely on the landing above, forcing air in ragged gasps, sweat stinging his eyes, he climbed. The groans amplified, echoing viscously up the central shaft. The darkness deepened, intensified. His legs threatened to buckle, but sheer will propelled him upward. Bursting into his loft, he slammed and bolted the door, collapsing against it, collar soaked, chest painfully constricted. Breath returned slowly. He peered through the fisheye lens of the peephole, expecting something. Sleep offered no refuge, only dreams of creaking wood and a relentless, echoing heartbeat. Dawn found him hollowed out, trembling. Daylight offered a temporary reprieve. Around noon, Elias descended the staircase deliberately. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, rendering the space mundane. The central void was just that, empty air, normal shadows. No pulsing darkness, no resonant groans. Perhaps it was just the building's eccentricities, amplified by his own solitude and exhaustion. He forced himself into daytime routines, fetching groceries, taking out refuse, using the stairs without incident, exchanging brief nods with passing neighbors. All perfectly ordinary. Yet as dusk bled into night, the familiar vice would tighten around his chest. By 11:30, the thought of needing anything from below filled him with a paralyzing dread. Avoidance became strategy. Necessity forced his hand a few nights later. Laundry near midnight. The subterranean washroom beckoned, and inevitably the temperamental elevator was inert. Clutching his bundle, Elias took a steadying breath and faced the stairwell door. Flickering fluorescence in the hall cast strobe-like shadows. Inside the stairwell, a single dying bulb illuminated the top landing. The central shaft yawned blackly, save for indistinct movements within the gloom. His hand found the rail. He began the descent. Each step elicited the familiar groan, perfectly timed to his accelerating heart. A physical pressure built in his chest, his arms prickled, the fine hairs rising. Reaching the basement, a cold, musty concrete warren, he fled to the relative sanctuary of the humming laundry room. He loaded the machine, pacing the damp floor, trying to rationalize the fear. No figure, no footsteps, just that shape. The rhythmic churn of the washer was almost soothing, but the ascent loomed. Laundry finished, he stood at the foot of the stairs, gazing up the towering spiral, vanishing into shadow. Feeble lights marked the landings like dying stars. His foot met the first step. Creak. He froze, pulse hammering in his ears. The railing felt impossibly cold, biting like frost. Step followed, hesitant step. The wood's lament a direct echo of his internal rhythm. Vertigo threatened. Reaching the second floor, he chanced a look. The shadow pulsed, larger, fluttering like vast, dark wings. His throat constricted. Swallowing felt like forcing down stones. His body went rigid. Flight screamed through his mind, but the treacherous steps forbade speed. He forced a measured climb. Approaching the third floor, the shadow thrashed violently. A dull ache pulsed behind his eyes. He burst onto his landing, gasping, pulse throbbing visibly in his neck, skin slick with cold sweat. Keys fumbled, the door yielded. He stumbled inside. Dropping the laundry, he fought for composure, heart battering his ribs. In the bathroom, cold water shocked his face. His reflection stared back, haggard, eyes bruised with sleeplessness. He gripped the sink, hands trembling uncontrollably. Sleep aids tempted him, but the need for vigilance felt paramount. Another week cycled through the same grim pattern. Every nocturnal passage down those stairs brought him face to face with the burgeoning shadow in the core. It swelled with each encounter. The distinct sensation of being watched intensified, a palpable pressure despite the absence of eyes. His chest would seize preemptively upon approaching the landing. The groaning wood felt increasingly animate, the vibrations underfoot more pronounced, as if the entire helix inhaled and exhaled in concert with his own strained breathing. Around 3 one morning, a metallic clattering, pipes protesting, echoed from the hall. Investigating a potential leak, Elias approached the stairwell. Opening the door unleashed an immediate tachycardia. The space felt unnaturally dark, the air leaden, resisting each inhalation. Sweat slicked his palms, a strange numbness creeping up his arms. He peered over the rail. The central void throbbed, filled entirely by the undulating darkness, rippling in slow waves. Then impossibly, the wood creaked. A step groaning nearby, though he stood immobile on the landing. It sounded as if the stairs themselves stirred. His heart felt ready to detonate. Gripping the rail, he watched the shadow detach, seeming to drift upwards from the depths, expanding towards him. Vertigo spun the world. His legs turned to water. He scrambled backward, slammed the heavy door, retreated into his apartment, bolts thrown, heart echoing the phantom creaks. He endured the remaining hours vigilantly, perched on his settee, knees drawn up, mastering his breathing while a bone-deep chill lingered. Dawn brought fitful sleep. Midday sun again painted the stairwell in benign tones. A trip down and back revealed nothing amiss. For a fragile hour, he almost convinced himself it was delusion. But night fell, and with it, the relentless drip, drip, drip from his bathroom faucet. His toolkit was in the car. The elevator remained stubbornly out of service. Around 1:30, bracing himself, he faced the stairs. The instant the door opened, a profound groan emanated from the wood. His heart leaped. Hesitating at the precipice, he looked down. The shadow pulsed, immense now, seeming to choke the entire central column. Panic surged, hot and acidic. Breath hitched, shallow and fast. His eyes stung. But the faucet demanded attention. He began the descent, gaze locked on the treads immediately before him, refusing the abyss. Each plank protested underfoot. His hands trembled on the icy rail. Sweat traced cold paths down his temples. The air hung thick, cloying with stale odors. A peripheral glance confirmed it. The darkness rippled, undulating to the frantic tempo of his own blood. Step by agonizing step, he descended. Reaching the ground floor left him shuddering, chest clamped tight, shirt clinging damply, breath sawing through his open mouth. He bolted outside, retrieved the tools, then stood frozen, staring at the lobby entrance. A silent summons seemed to emanate from within, a magnetic pull back towards the spiral. He fought it, shoved the door open, stepped back inside the silent lobby. Gazing upward, the helix seemed impossibly black towards the top, swallowing the weak landing lights. His pulse hammered in his throat. A dry swallow, then the first step. The wood shrieked. A tremor traced his spine. His chest felt ready to rupture. Knuckles white, he gripped the rail. The creaks intensified with each upward step, the smell of ancient dust sharp in his nostrils. Nausea roiled. Passing the second floor, the shadow flickered violently. His heart hammered, vision momentarily swimming. Sheer momentum carried him onward. He stumbled onto the third-floor landing, fumbled the lock, fell inside, slamming the door. He collapsed onto the settee, toolkit clattering to the floor. Breath tore through him in ragged bursts. A profound ache settled deep in his limbs. His pulse echoed in his skull. He sat there, immobile, the dripping faucet forgotten, utterly spent. It struck him then, with chilling certainty. Whatever resided in the heart of that spiral fed on his fear, growing stronger with each terrified passage. Was it objective reality, or the fraying fabric of his own sanity? He couldn't say. All Elias knew was the undeniable pull exerted by the stairs after dark. The timber beneath his feet thrumming like the chambers of some colossal, unseen heart. And the icy conviction persisted. One night, he would descend those groaning steps and simply cease to return. Some voids aren't merely an absence of light. They are pockets of stillness where time itself seems to have stalled, leaving behind a residue of profound quiet, a heaviness suggesting the world spun on, abandoning this particular coordinate. Such was the texture of the night I consented to inhabit Leo's ancestral cabin, nestled deep within an arboreal labyrinth. My expectations were modest, a weekend steeped in silence, perhaps a severance from life's relentless static. Yet the instant my boots crossed the threshold, an undeniable alteration registered in the air. This wasn't the companionable hush of wilderness, punctuated by rustling leaves or the scurry of unseen life, but a vacuum, profound and watchful. The cabin, a relic passed through Leo's lineage, had languished unused for years. His invitation for a weekend escape met with my immediate assent, the allure of retreat proving irresistible. While he and his partner planned a subsequent day's arrival, I elected for an early departure, envisioning a solitary night immersed in woodland tranquility, a hearth ablaze, a novel's company, a communion with self. My arrival coincided with the day's final exhalation, just shy of true dark. The journey, longer than anticipated, snaked along a dirt ribbon that seemed less a road than an artery pulling me into the heart of nowhere. As I halted the engine, the descending sun bled long, phantasmal shadows across the clearing dominated by the cabin. The structure itself presented a facade of rugged endurance, weather-beaten timbers, a chimney exhaling stone breath, a porch gazing stoically into the encroaching woods. It epitomized the woodland cabin archetype: rustic, sequestered, silent, terribly silent. Retrieving my overnight bag, I ascended the porch steps, their wooden lamentations echoing my weight. The front door yielded with a groan of long undisturbed hinges. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, redolent of damp decay and time settled like dust. A tentative flick of the switch surprisingly coaxed the lights into an anemic luminescence, revealing a Spartan layout: a single chamber encompassing a hearth, a rudimentary kitchen alcove, and a portal to a rear bedroom. A sofa slumped before the fireplace, flanked by aged armchairs, all veiled in a fine shroud of neglect. Clearly, human presence had long been absent. I unlatched several windows, hoping to infuse the space with fresher air. Outside, a desultory breeze stirred, barely coaxing a whisper from the leaves, yet it failed utterly to displace the suffocating stillness that permeated the cabin's core. A persistent prickle, the sensation of being observed, I dismissed as nerves, the natural byproduct of solitude in an unfamiliar domain. Once the fire caught, licking the logs with energetic crackles, a semblance of normalcy began to emerge. Flames painted the walls with kinetic shadows, their warmth a welcome counterpoint to the ambient chill. Sustenance prepared and consumed, I curled onto the sofa with my book, consciously willing relaxation. For a time, the illusion held. The fire's radiant heat fostered a fragile coziness, its flickering dance almost mesmerizing. Then surfaced the sound, a delicate percussion, insistent yet faint, emanating from somewhere beyond the cabin walls. Lowering my book, I strained my ears. Beneath the fire's soft pops, the tapping persisted. Tap, 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 not random but measured, like knuckles rapping gently against wood or glass. I rose, casting a glance towards the nearest window, its surface dark, mirroring only the firelight's restless glow. Wind, I rationalized, perhaps a branch caressing the exterior. Yet the rhythm felt too deliberate, too consistent for nature's caprice. It possessed an unnerving regularity, as if seeking acknowledgement. A tremor started in my chest as I drifted towards the front door, the faint tapping an unwavering undertone. Snatching the flashlight from my bag, its beam sliced the gloom as I eased the door open and stepped onto the porch. The night air hung inert, preternaturally still. The breeze had vanished. The trees stood like statues under the moon's pallid gaze. The moment the door opened, the tapping ceased, leaving an absolute silence that pressed in from all sides. I swept the flashlight's beam across the clearing, probing the tree line for any flicker of motion. nothing. Only the brooding forest and the dark cabin sentinel at my back. I remained there, poised in the quiet, listening, waiting, but the sound withheld its return. After several long minutes, I persuaded myself it had been mundane, a loose shutter, perhaps, or the groaning settlement of old timbers in the cooling air. Securing the door, bolting it firmly, I retreated to the fire's perceived safety. The disquiet, however, clung like wood smoke. Try as I might to immerse myself in the narrative, the conviction of not being alone refused to dissipate. Every creak of the floorboards, every explosive crackle from the hearth seemed amplified in the profound hush, and the shadows stretching across the walls felt deeper, imbued with a latent intent. Then it began anew, louder this time, freighted with undeniable insistence. I froze, my gaze snapping towards the windows. The source now seemed localized at the cabin's far side, near the rear bedroom. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, steady, purposeful. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rising again, flashlight clutched tight, I felt a powerful reluctance to investigate further, a primal urge to ignore whatever waited outside. But the knocking intensified, escalating into a demand. Whatever entity resided in the darkness was not content to be ignored. With hesitant steps, I navigated towards the cabin's rear, the flashlight's beam trembling in my grasp. The rapping emanated from directly outside the bedroom window, so proximate now it felt invasive, almost inside the room with me. Knock, knock, knock. Reaching the bedroom door, I pushed it inward. The hinges shrieked their protest into the stillness. The room was compact, furnished merely with a bedstead and a wooden dresser. The single window on the far wall was shut fast, yet the sound persisted, originating just beyond the glass pane. Drawing nearer, breath held captive in my throat, I directed the flashlight's beam towards the window. Initially, nothing but the empty, moon-washed clearing met my gaze. Then, sweeping the light lower towards the forest's edge, I saw it. A solitary, tenebrous form, positioned just beyond the clearing, partially swallowed by the tree's deep shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally slender, seeming to merge with the surrounding gloom. Features remained elusive. No face discernible, no distinct shape. Only this stark silhouette, like a figment of darkness given terrifying substance. Rooted to the spot, the flashlight quivering, I stared. The figure remained perfectly motionless, observing. The tapping abruptly stopped. An eternity seemed compressed into that moment of breathless, unblinking confrontation. The figure held its posture, head canted slightly, as if engaged in dispassionate study. A scream built within me, a desperate need to flee, to react, but paralysis held me fast, my feet seemingly fused to the floorboards, my pulse a frantic drum against the silence. Then, as suddenly as it manifested, the shape pivoted and dissolved back into the arboreal depths, vanishing soundlessly into the night. I stood there long after it was gone, fixated on the empty space it had occupied, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. Finally, motor control returned. I stumbled back into the main room, heart still galloping. Sleep was an impossibility that night. The windows remained unapproached. I huddled by the dying fire, flashlight clutched in one hand, my phone, a useless brick devoid of service, in the other, simply waiting, praying for the dawn to dilute the suffocating darkness. When Leo and his girlfriend arrived the next morning, buoyant and oblivious, the words lodged in my throat. Packing swiftly, I fabricated an excuse about needing an early departure. They accepted it easily, failing to notice the tremor in my hands as I loaded the car. I haven't returned to that cabin. I harbor no intention of ever doing so. Some locations, I now understand, are best left to their forgetting. And sometimes, the deepest dread lies in never truly knowing what watches you from the periphery of the shadows. The memory ignites with the hammer blow of the sun on my skull. The air in that desolate expanse tasting paradoxically ancient, brittle, despite the open sky. I'd arrived via a shuddering Land Rover, piloted by two men whose faces seemed carved from the landscape itself. They deposited me near a low heave of stone and sand, then dissolved back into the heat shimmer without a word exchanged beyond necessity. A current, sharp and electric, jolted through my gut. Whispers of untouched strata, of history undisturbed, had drawn me across continents. My name is Alistair Finch, a scholar of the fragmented past, a chaser of echoes in stone, and my mind hummed, a hive of scholarly anticipation. Crumbling ramparts, perhaps some pottery shards glazed by time. These were the prosaic expectations. Nothing prepared me for the profound wrongness I unearthed, a disquietude that clings to me still, a shadow stitched to my soul. Near the ruin's flank, where sand had drifted against a half-interred skeleton of a structure, I began my work. Much was familiar archaeological debris. The geometry of broken walls, faint tracery of forgotten artistry along edges, the scatter suggesting a collapsed roof. Standard fare, but clearing the wind-scoured accumulation near the eastern aspect revealed the unexpected, the distinct lip of a descending stairwell. A fissure of surprise cracked my professional composure. No charts, no survey notes mentioned a descent here, a delve beneath the surface. Kneeling, I brushed away millennia of grit. The steps emerged, whole, fashioned from a dense obsidian-like stone that resisted immediate identification. My pulse leaped, a frantic bird against my ribs. Retrieving my torch, I cast its beam into the aperture, seeking depth, but the darkness swallowed the light whole, revealing only the precipitous angle of the initial plunge. A rope, anchored to a driven metal stake, became my tether to the sunlit world. I descended, each footfall on the alien stone echoing unnaturally, a hollow resonance in the confined space. My heart hammered a counterpoint rhythm. Soon the walls, slick and cool, pressed close. I halted. Inscriptions. Not the elegant figures of Egypt, nor the cuneiform wedges of Mesopotamia. These were glyphs unlike any catalogued script. They writhed with unsettling lines, organic curves that seemed almost proto-biological. A variant, perhaps, a forgotten dialect of symbols. Yet nothing in my considerable lexicon resonated. More disturbing still was the faint, spectral luminescence they emanated when caught in my torchlight. Not a reflection, but a cold internal gleam that seemed to shift, to crawl along the edges of the carvings. I reached out, fingers trembling slightly, seeking warmth, vibration, any sign of energy. Nothing. Just cold, impassive stone. My breath hitched. A nameless instinct urged retreat, a primal caution screaming from forgotten corners of the psyche. Curiosity that, academic serpent, hissed louder. I pressed on. The stairwell coiled, narrowing until my shoulders grazed the walls, dislodging tiny cascades of stone that skittered into the depths below. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of enclosed time, yet threaded with a faint metallic tang, sharp as ozone, mingled with the damp earthiness of deep moss. Its source remained elusive. At a turn I froze, an echo, faint, impossibly distant yet distinct, a rhythmic susurrus like a low chant, swelling for a moment before fading into the profound silence. I clicked off my torch. Darkness became absolute, tactile. My hearing strained, catching a subtle cadence beneath the silence, a rhythm like vast, slow respiration that was definitively not my own. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. My jaw clamped tight. Air currents, I reasoned. Acoustic anomalies. Tricks of a stressed mind in an enclosed space. The torch flickered back to life, a frail weapon against the encroaching strangeness. I continued downward. Deeper still, a motif began to repeat on the walls, carved with unnerving regularity. A human face rendered smooth, featureless. Where eyes and mouth should have offered expression, there was only an unnerving, polished blankness. Every few paces it reappeared, sometimes small, sometimes large, but always the same effaced visage. A queasy knot formed in my stomach. Guardian figures, protective symbols. My internal catalogue offered no parallels, no comfort. My palms grew clammy. Wiping them on my trousers did nothing to dispel the clinging unease. The descent eventually ceased. The floor beneath my boots leveled out onto smooth flagstones. Abruptly, my torch beam began to stutter, pulsing erratically. I tapped the casing, fresh batteries that morning, but the faltering light persisted, casting the passage into a dizzying chiaroscuro. Shadows writhed, elongated, and in the periphery, I caught a flicker. Movement. I spun, light spearing the spot. Only stone. Only another blank, silent face staring from the wall. A short, nervous laugh escaped me, sounding alien in the stillness. I moved forward, the knot in my stomach tightening into a cold fist. A few more yards brought me into a vast chamber. My sputtering torch revealed a high, vaulted ceiling supported by immense pillars, thick as ancient trees. The space felt cavernously empty. Stone pedestals stood scattered like forgotten chess pieces, but they bore no statues, no artifacts. Then I saw the pillars, adorned with inscriptions, denser, more elaborate versions of the glyphs from the stairwell. Some lines seemed impossibly sharp, freshly incised. Others were worn smooth by ages, unrecorded. A palpable weight pressed down in the chamber, the air itself seeming dense, resistant. And then the sound returned. That whispering chant, so faint it might have been blood rushing in my ears, yet seemingly closer now, emanating perhaps from the very stones surrounding me. I stepped towards the chamber's heart, sweeping the erratic beam around. That's when I saw the floor. A great circular design dominated the center, a swirling vortex of lines converging into the shape of that same ubiquitous, featureless face. A pressure built in my chest, an invisible force pushing me back, warning me away from that central sigil. I tried to approach, compelled by the scholar's need to understand, but an overwhelming certainty washed over me. Stepping onto that design would be an irrevocable error. My pulse thundered. Sweat slicked my hands. Enough. I had seen enough for one solitary foray, especially with failing equipment and burgeoning dread. Turning, I began the trek back, the sensation of unseen eyes following me, an almost physical touch. The ascent was exponentially harder. My lungs burned with the stale, metallic air. My limbs felt leaden, protesting as if I'd journeyed for days, not hours. The phantom chanting seemed to pursue me, echoing just behind, or perhaps now only inside my own skull. At every turn of the stairs, I risked a backward glance, half expecting a figure to loom from the receding darkness. Nothing. Only the endless repetition of those eyeless, mouthless faces carved into the stone, silent witnesses to my retreat. Reaching the surface felt like breaking water after near drowning. The late afternoon sun was a physical blow, blinding me. My campsite, a quarter-mile distant, seemed a haven. I walked towards it, relief flooding me with each step away from that subterranean anomaly. Yet later, as I tried to prepare a simple meal, my hands refused to still. My heart continued its frantic rhythm. My mouth was desert dry. Water helped little. A protein bar tasted of dust and ashes. I choked it down, attributing the lingering tremors to exhaustion and the bizarre nature of the find. Rest, I told myself. Just rest. Sleep, when it came, was a shallow, troubled thing. Around midnight, I snapped awake on my cot, fully clothed, heart hammering. Not from a dream. My eyes were open, staring into the tense fabric, but my mind's eye was elsewhere, trapped in a dark, echoing hall lined with statues of figures whose faces were smooth, blank voids. They weren't entirely still. A subtle shift of a shoulder here, a slow turn of a head there, perceived only when my mental gaze wasn't directly upon them. A cold vice clamped around my chest, sweat beaded on my brow. The tent felt suffocating. I scrambled outside into the cool desert night. Nothing but dunes silvered by starlight, the vast, indifferent silence. But the afterimage burned behind my retinas. Sleep became impossible. Brief snatches of oblivion were shattered by waking gasps, each time the faceless figures looming closer in my internal vision. In one particularly vivid sequence, I stood again in the chamber, on the swirling floor design, the statues forming a tightening circle around me, leaning inwards, their silence an expectant void. I couldn't breathe, couldn't draw enough air. I paced the perimeter of my camp until dawn, checking gear, forcing mundane thoughts. But the knot of fear in my gut remained, cold and hard. The following dawn brought decision. I broke camp with hurried, clumsy movements, loaded the Land Rover and drove for hours towards the nearest semblance of civilization. Escape? Oblivion? That was the goal. Yet the desert itself seemed complicit. Shapes writhed in my peripheral vision as I drove. A glance in the rearview mirror revealed fleeting movement in the back seat, gone when I turned. By the time I reached a dusty town and its single, sun-bleached hotel, I was drenched in sweat, nausea churning. I took a room, tried to marshal my thoughts, to anchor myself in rationality. Research, that was the key. Local legends, forgotten surveys, surely there was an explanation. But opening my laptop summoned the blank face to my mind's eye, triggered the faint, phantom chant. I'd slammed the lid shut, head in hands, fighting for steady breaths, the tension in my shoulders and neck a permanent ache. It felt as if the tunnel's oppressive atmosphere had traveled with me. Eating was difficult, focus impossible. My body remained coiled, alert, still trapped in that subterranean dark. Days bled into a week of attempted normalcy. Calls to colleagues yielded intrigued questions, but no answers regarding lost cultures favoring effaced iconography. The nights grew worse. The visions intensified. The Hall of Statues became a recurring nightmare theater. Sometimes a cold draft would snake across my skin in the sealed room. The chanting would surface, a low thrumming beneath the threshold of hearing. My heart would race. I'd clutch the bed sheets, whispering common mantras that felt utterly useless against the rising tide of panic, the tingling numbness creeping into my limbs. Subtle changes began to manifest in my waking world. Shadows in my apartment corridor seemed to deepen, to shift with unnatural fluidity. Doors resisted opening, their hinges groaning with a cadence disturbingly reminiscent of the chant. My phone would buzz, silence on the line, followed by the faintest impression of breathing, distant and cold. Once staring from my window into the night, I saw a silhouette on the street below, stark, featureless, seemingly looking directly up at me. I blinked, and it vanished. Psychological trauma, I insisted, an overreaction to an undeniably eerie sight. But the rationalizations crumbled. The intrusions grew bolder, sharper. The statues flickered at the edge of my vision as I moved through my own home. Spinning to confront them revealed only empty air, leaving my heart pounding, my hands shaking. The gurgle of the shower drain took on the chanting's rhythm, forcing me to cut the water, standing dripping and straining to hear, enveloped in a silence that felt pregnant with waiting. My mind felt fractured, yet the experiences were too visceral, too consistent, to dismiss entirely. Slowly, terrifyingly, I began to understand the vision's implicit message. They weren't just memories or hallucinations. They were a summons. The statues, inching closer each night in my mind, crowding my sleeping space, beckoned. The faint, metallic, mossy odor from the tunnel would sometimes taint the air in my apartment. I'd wake drenched in sweat, eyes darting to the shadowed corners, expecting a faceless form to coalesce from the dark. Fumbling for the lamp brought momentary relief, shattered by a fleeting flicker at the edge of the light, a shape withdrawing. Panic attacks ambushed me in broad daylight. Concentration evaporated. Attempting to read academic texts, the letters themselves would seem to swim, momentarily forming the blank oval of that face on the page. I'd slam the book shut, fighting a rising hysteria. There was no escape. The pressure, the constant grinding tension, was becoming unbearable. A decision solidified, born not of courage but of desperation. I gathered my equipment once more, booked passage back to that desolate region. I would return, descend again, investigate properly this time, search for a clue, an artifact, anything that might sever this connection. Logic offered no roadmap, but the haunting had become my entire reality. My nights belonged to the creeping shapes and the silent chant. Confrontation felt like the only path left, however perilous. So now I sit in a sterile motel room, not far from the track leading back to that site. My hands tremble as I record this. A familiar tightness constricts my chest. The air here is thick, stagnant, but the window stays shut. The desert wind's moan outside mimics the tunnel's echo too closely. My gear lies ready. Torch, spare batteries, rope, camera, phone with useless tracking apps. First light is my deadline. I won't approach that place in darkness again. Already my heart pounds erratically. My shoulders ache. Images of the blank statues flood my mind, waiting in the chamber, turning their smooth heads as I approach. Each thought sends a shudder through me, yet the compulsion is absolute. My life has been suspended since I fled that place, trapped in a loop of dread and faceless watchers, awake or asleep. I sense that revisiting the passage might plunge me deeper into the inexplicable. The chant might become deafening. The very walls might writhe. Rationality has deserted me. I crave only release. I need to face those featureless figures, to look into their blankness and demand cessation. Tomorrow, I drive back. I descend. I confront whatever waits in that chamber. The thought sends ice down my spine, yet inaction is no longer an option. This isn't just a ruin. It's something aware, something that marked me, something that refuses to let go. I don't anticipate answers, perhaps not even survival in the conventional sense. But I must step back into that darkness. Perhaps there, I will finally see what resides in that place. Or perhaps it will finally, truly see me. I am ready, or rather I am going, irrespective of readiness. My body trembles, my mouth is parched, my pulse frantic. I scan the corners of this cheap room, half expecting a silent sentinel to stand there. Nothing. Just me, the flickering lamp, and the ragged edge of my sanity. Tomorrow will tell if this nightmare has an end. If not, at least I will have faced it. Walked back into the tunnel, towards the empty chamber, beneath the swirling design, among the silent pillars. Soon enough, I will know. Two weeks now it has been since the old family likeness found its place upon my living room wall. An artifact intended to lend a certain patina of age, a counterpoint to the stark lines of modern furnishings. I could not have predicted it would instead become an anchor, dragging me toward the reefs of unreason. The memory remains sharp, discovering it entombed in cardboard and dust within my parents' attic labyrinth. A distant kinsman, my mother offered vaguely, a name lost to the generational murmur. Its arrival in their home was likewise shrouded. It had simply been, persisting through epochs. Leaving it to languish felt like a betrayal. It deserved exhibition, I reasoned then. Never did I anticipate its nocturnal attention. Mine is a solitary existence in a modest dwelling fringing the town's sprawl. The compact living space flows directly into the kitchen, and the portrait dominates the entryway view. It depicts a gentleman of severe countenance, attired in the fabrics of a forgotten century. His eyes, though dark pigment on canvas, harbor an unnerving intensity, a latent declaration struggling for utterance. Encased in ponderous, intricately carved wood, the frame itself feels imbued with gravity. Only a stout hook, sunk deep, allowed me to install it. Stepping back, I surveyed my work. It seemed undeniably correct, as if the wall had long awaited its burden. For several days, normalcy held sway. The rhythm of return from work, the clatter of keys on the kitchen table, supper consumed before the flickering television, all proceeded undisturbed. Occasionally the portrait snagged the periphery of my vision. A fleeting impression, nothing more. Then came the night I lingered over a late film. Midnight approached and a profound lassitude claimed me. Switching off the set, I moved toward the hallway, but some impulse compelled me to halt before the painting. My gaze drifted to the ancestors' eyes. In that instant, they seemed to seize mine, a palpable connection. My skin bristled. Seconds stretched as I stared, dismissing the sensation as fatigue-born fancy. The following evening, the phenomenon recurred. A distinct impression, the painted eyes swiveling subtly as I transitioned from living room to kitchen. A profound awareness of being tracked settled upon me. I glanced back sharply. The portrait hung immobile, yet the air around it felt charged, imbued with a cold weight. A clamminess slicked my palms, a delicate chill traced my spine. Attempting to dispel the unease, I summoned music, loud and distracting. My heart hammered a slightly accelerated tempo. Not fear, precisely, but a keen, unsettling alertness. Days later, while preparing my evening meal, a sharp creak echoed from the living room. Not the familiar groan of aged timbers settling, but something distinct, the specific protest of the floorboard beside the sofa under deliberate pressure. I silenced the stove's hiss, stepped quickly into the adjacent room, and activated the overhead light. All appeared ordinary. The portrait presided, dimly illuminated by the table lamp's solitary glow. I strained my ears, listening for any further disturbance. Silence answered, thick and expectant. My skin felt taut, and I registered the unnatural tightness of my grip on the spatula. Eventually, I returned to the kitchen, my appetite extinguished. That same night, drawn by an insistent curiosity, I resolved to examine the painting more closely. Seated on the sofa, I angled the table lamp to cast its glare directly onto the canvas. The paint surface showed its age, a fine web of craquelure mapping the background. The ancestors' eyes possessed a peculiar vitreous sheen. The meticulous brushwork there bespoke a particular focus. Leaning nearer, my attention caught on an anomaly near the canvas edge. A subtle discoloration, a variance suggesting another stratum beneath. Retrieving a torch from a kitchen drawer, I scrutinized the area. Indisputably, the faint outline of something else resided there. A second visage, submerged beneath the ancestors' likeness. Its details remained obscure, yet it was undeniably not part of the intended composition. A knot tightened in my stomach. Lowering the heavy frame to the floor, I tentatively probed the edge with a fingernail, hoping to loosen a fragment of the uppermost layer. A minuscule flake detached. Unwilling to inflict real damage, I desisted. Why? I pondered, sitting back on my heels. Would an artist superimpose one portrait upon another? A faint tremor agitated my hands. Annoyance warred with apprehension. Annoyance at my own skittishness, apprehension fueled by the undeniable strangeness emanating from the canvas. It radiated a kind of static energy, a low hum just beneath the threshold of hearing. Rising to fetch water, I had barely crossed into the kitchen when a dull thump sounded behind me. I spun back, heart leaping. The painting rested undisturbed against the sofa. Nothing else seemed amiss, yet the tension in the room was palpable. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. Breathe, I commanded myself. It's late. Fatigue plays tricks. I sank back onto the sofa, forcing calm. Sleep, when it came, offered no respite. I dreamt the ancestor stood within my living room, clad in his archaic attire. His lips moved, shaping silent pronouncements. My name, Elias, reached me, distorted, less a word than a sibilant hiss. I awoke abruptly, slick with sweat, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The bedside clock glowed. 3 a.m. Sleep remained elusive for the duration of the night. Morning brought the imperative of routine. Rise, shower, coffee. I consciously averted my gaze from the portrait as I passed. A pervasive unease lingered. My neck felt rigid, eyes gritty with lost sleep. Attributing it to poor rest, I swallowed a pain reliever and drank my coffee in strained silence. Work beckoned. I fled the house, seeking refuge in professional obligations. Yet throughout the day, the dream echoed, the insidious hiss a persistent undertone in my thoughts. Returning home that evening, I paused, hand on the doorknob, steeling myself. Inside, the painting hung in its appointed place. I forced myself to approach, to scrutinize it. The painted face remained unchanged, the eyes inert, yet the sensation of being observed had intensified, become almost tactile. My mouth was desert dry. Reaching out, I touched the wooden frame. Its chill was startling, colder than timber ought to be. A shiver traced my vertebrae. Shaking it off, I busied myself with evening rituals, attempting distraction via the endless scroll of my phone. Futile. My gaze snapped back to the portrait every few minutes. Around 10, tidying the living room, I extinguished the lamp and turned to leave. Abruptly, the overwhelming certainty of a presence directly behind me flooded my senses. My back muscles seized, my heart rate surged, an instinct screamed, "Run!" I whirled around, breath catching. Only the portrait, observing the empty room. But the air itself felt different, denser, the pressure subtly altered. I compelled my lungs to draw air, then retreated down the hallway, refusing to look back. That night, supine in bed, eyes fixed on the shadowed ceiling, my mind refused stillness. Thoughts circled the obscured face beneath the paint. Should I attempt to uncover it? Might that hidden countenance hold the key to this ancestor, this haunting? A tightness constricted my chest. Did I truly wish to know? The dream's residue clung, a potent deterrent to further revelation. Closing my eyes became an act of will. Eventually oblivion claimed me, but it was a thin, troubled veil. The man from the portrait populated my dreams again. In one sequence, he extended a hand, his fingers closing around my wrist. I felt it, the distinct pressure of a grasp. Then his face flickered, overlaid by a second set of features, ephemeral as a failing light. A faint knocking sound permeated the dream, its source indeterminate. I awoke with a gasp, sheets damp, the phantom pressure lingering on my arm. Nearly 4 a.m., my heart hammered. Sitting up, the room seemed to tilt. I checked my phone. No messages, no external disturbance. Water did little to soothe the internal tremor. Dawn arrived before calm did. The following evening, inaction became untenable. I repositioned a small desk lamp onto the living room floor beside the portrait, fetched a delicate scraper and cotton swabs from the garage's clutter. Kneeling before the canvas, my hands trembled slightly as I began gingerly to test the paint layers near the edge. My aim, to peel back just enough to glimpse what lay beneath, without compromising the whole. The uppermost layer yielded in tiny, brittle flakes. Hints of another color emerged, a deep blue, perhaps, or green. Not background filler, part of a figure. The rough curve of an eye socket became visible, misaligned with the surface portrait's gaze. A sudden, inexplicable draft swept cold across my shoulders. I shivered, twisting around, half expecting intrusion. Emptiness greeted me. Tension throbbed behind my eyes. Turning back, I resumed my careful excavation. After perhaps 30 minutes, my knees ached from the hard floor. Rising to stretch, my phone buzzed. A message from a friend. I glanced at it, unseeing, unable to divert my focus. Placing the painting flat upon the coffee table offered a better angle. I leaned close, adjusting the lamp. More flakes surrendered, disclosing the curve of a different mouth, thinner-lipped than the ancestors. Beneath the overlaid paint, I discerned the faint suggestion of a nasal ridge. Clamminess returned to my palms. A desperate urge to see warred with a profound reluctance to proceed. Nausea surged. Stepping back, I drew several deep, steadying breaths. The hour grew late. Exhaustion, physical and psychic, weighed heavily. Enough, I decided. Carefully, I returned the portrait to its hook, swept up the paint dust, stowed the tools. My eyes burned. My back protested with stiffness. In the bathroom, splashing cool water on my face, my reflection startled me, eyes bloodshot, underscored by dark crescents. Dinner remained uneaten, hunger eclipsed by a gnawing disquiet. Sleep, or at least rest, was the only desire. Retiring to bed, I left my door ajar, a departure from habit, born of a need to monitor the house's nocturnal sighs. Darkness settled, punctuated only by the faint sodium glow of a distant street lamp filtering through the window. I lay alert, ears straining against the silence. For a long while, nothing. Then near midnight, it came. The distinct creak of the living room floorboard. The same spot as before. My muscles locked, cold perspiration beaded on my forehead. Breathing grew shallow. An instinct urged me to curl into a protective ball, but I fought it, rising, compelled to investigate. The hallway light, switched on, cast weak illumination into the living area. The painting hung, still and watchful. The room was vacant. My heart pounded with painful force against my sternum. I waited, poised in the threshold's dim light, for minutes that stretched into an eternity. Nothing further disturbed the quiet. I retreated to bed. Sleep remained a distant shore. My imagination populated the darkness with the painting's shifting eyes. At some indeterminate point, exhaustion must have prevailed, for I dreamt again. The ancestor's face dissolved, reforming into the second countenance, the two visages swapping, merging, separating. Their mouths moved, emitting a stream of unintelligible whispers, like static crackling over a faulty line. A hand settled firmly on my shoulder. I jolted awake, the point of contact tingling, the room empty. Staring at the ceiling, pulse erratic, I waited for the adrenaline to subside. It took time. Now roughly a fortnight since I introduced that ancestral presence into my home. Its grip tightens. Looking at it is an exercise in controlled dread, yet the thought of removing it feels impossible, almost forbidden, as if its presence here is mandated. Each time I pass, the weight of those painted eyes settles upon me. My skin crawls, my thoughts spiral. Evidence of the hidden face lies partially uncovered, a palimpsest of identity I lack the courage to fully expose. What visage waits beneath? What truth? Fear gnaws at me. Fear of the escalating dreams, the chilling anomalies within these walls. They intensify, night by night. I cannot fathom what the painting requires, if indeed it requires anything beyond my sanity. Perhaps it is all delusion, yet the body's betrayals, the tightening back, the slick palms, the phantom footfalls just behind, feel terrifyingly real. The nights are the crucible. Tension accrues like a charge in the air, leaving me hyper-vigilant, parsing every creak and sigh of the old house. My heart races at imagined stimuli. My jaw aches from unconscious clenching. A persistent conviction haunts me. The portrait trembles on the verge of revelation. It presses against my mind, a low-frequency thrum behind the skull. I remain unready for whatever truth lies buried in pigment and time. The dreams persist, the ancestor figure striving to impart some vital secret, his voice lost in whispers and noise. My thoughts oscillate wildly between morbid curiosity and paralyzing dread. Whether I can ultimately confront the painting's hidden heart remains uncertain. But this much is clear. Its silent insistence cannot be ignored indefinitely. For now, I navigate each day, each night, tethered to the fraying edge of reason, hoping the answers, when they inevitably surface, do not shatter me in the deep watches of the night.